Alright, hello guys. So I've acquired, as you might imagine, a number of books over the holidays. Actually, a surprisingly small number of them were actually as Christmas presents. Several of them I bought at Barnes & Noble with some gift cards, but others were just books that I went home to my parents' house and realized I'd never read or had left them there previously thinking I didn't want to read them, but then had a change of heart. So yeah, I'll start with one that I'm kind of taking a break from reading to record this video. It's The Metamorphosis and Other Stories by Franz Kafka, which I am buddy reading with Laura Pora. First ever Kafka I've read. I've now read about 2/3 of this, including The Metamorphosis itself, and I'm really loving it. Next is the Epic of Gilgamesh, a different translation than the one I currently have. The one I currently have is the translation by Stephen Mitchell. This is by N.K. Sandars. And I'm interested in rereading the Epic of Gilgamesh anyway. I thought it might be cool to read a new translation since it was just at my house. And I'm also very interested in the introduction that's in here, because it's a Penguin Classic, and Penguin Classics tend to have good introductions. So yeah, be reading that sometime this year. Next was a Christmas present from my brother. It's Letters to a Young Scientist by Edward O. Wilson. My brother is studying wildlife ecology. I'm studying psychology, so this was relevant to both of us. And I actually read it. I finished it yesterday, and I don't know how relevant it would be to people who aren't planning to become scientists, but I really enjoyed it. I maybe didn't learn that much new stuff, but the way that Edward O. Wilson articulated a lot of ideas about science and about scientific research and becoming a scientist, he expressed things that I had thought so beautifully that I still really liked it. So yeah. Next is Wild by Cheryl Strayed, which was just a book that that my mom just gave me, not as a Christmas present. I had actually given it to her as a birthday present, because she was getting really into hiking a lot. So I thought she would like it, and she did love it, and she said I would probably love it, because I'm trying to get into hiking. So yeah, I think I'll really like this. It's pretty famous, about a woman whose life kind of falls apart when she's in her early 20s, and so to kind of find herself and get herself back together, she goes and decides to hike the Pacific Crest Trail, which is, I don't know much about the Pacific Crest Trail, but it's apparently this long trail in California through, I imagine, a bunch of national parks. And I'm going to Grand Teton National Park this summer, and I may be going to Big Bend National Park in March. I'm not entirely certain about that yet, but I hope I will be. So I'm getting into visiting national parks, so I think this will be cool. Next is 10 Plays by Euripides, a lovely Signet Classics edition. Unfortunately, this was one I bought at Barnes & Noble. I found it there and bought it with a gift card. Unfortunately, the spine was already broken when I got it, which is always kind of weird, but I'll probably end up breaking the spine anyway. I'm starting to become a person who enjoys breaking spines, so I'm not offended by broken spines. It felt strange buying a book with a spine already broken. But anyway, Euripides, one of the three great Greek tragedians, the only one who I haven't read anything by. I've read all of the surviving plays of Aeschylus and Sophocles and loved every single one, but I've read nothing by Euripides. Although when I read Edith Hamilton's mythology, a lot of the stories of Euripides' plays she includes in her book. So I'm eager to read them because I loved a lot of those stories. So yeah, Euripides. Next is a Shakespeare play, Coriolanus, just one of the plays I haven't read. There's only 4 I haven't read, and I'm thinking I might try to read this before I go back to classes, which is on the 16th of January. But yeah, so I just saw this in Barnes & Noble and had the gift card and just figured why not. When I have an individual copy, it's an extra motivator to actually read it. So yeah, Coriolanus. And next one I'm really excited about, Lonesome Dove by Larry McMurtry. This is a Western, which isn't usually what I go for, but this I've heard so many good things about. It won the Pulitzer Prize. The first place I learned about it was at Climb the Stacks. Ashley did a review of it, and it sounded great. And I'm kind of been getting interested in maybe trying out some westerns because I visited Wyoming for the first time last year, and I really loved it. And as I mentioned in one of my litmus videos, I like reading books that are related to places I've been or places I want to go or things like that. So yeah, I'm thinking I'll like this. I think I'm going to save it for when I'm in classes, because I think it'll be a relatively easy read, and so it'll be easier on my brain to be in classes and read this rather than reading some of this heavier stuff. But yeah, so next is Myths and Legends of the Middle Ages. This is by H.A. Gerber. So it's actually a part of a series of books on myths and legends. On the back, it says they have Hindus and Buddhist myths and legends, North American Indians, the Norsemen. So I guess it's a part of a series, but after reading Mythology by Edith Hamilton, it reminded me how much I love myths and legends. So I grabbed this from my parents' house. This is a book I had previously wanted to read and then kind of abandoned, and have now picked up again. So yeah, I'm excited to read this. It has a lot of stories that I think I'll love it. It has Beowulf in it. It has a narration of the events of Beowulf. It doesn't actually have the poem of Beowulf in here. It's like Edith Hamilton's mythology in that it is a summary of a lot of different myths by this author. But I think I'll like this. And a lot of the myths and legends that are in here, I would love to in the future read the primary sources of. So I've read Beowulf, but also in here are like the Arthurian legends and the Nibelungenlied. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that right, but it's a German epic poem, I think. So yeah, I think this will be good. Next is a book that I am hopeful about. It is To End All Wars, A Story of Loyalty and Rebellion, 1914 to 1918 by Adam Hochschild. A History of World War I. I read King Leopold's Ghost by Adam Hochschild, which was about King Leopold of Belgium and his acquisition of the Congo as a colony. And, the things that went on in the Belgian Congo, which were all pretty horrific. And that was a subject, I had to read that book for a class, and that was a subject I wasn't the slightest bit interested in. But when I read it in Adam Hochschild's book, it was like candy. It was like reading a novel. It was great. So I'm hoping that he will make World War I just as interesting as he made the story of the Belgian Congo. So yeah. And lastly, we have two more giant books of nonfiction, and they both happen to be by very dead Greek people. The first is the Histories of Herodotus, possibly the first work of history ever written, and something I've been wanting to get to because I read Tacitus last year. I read his Annals of Imperial Rome and really enjoyed it, and it made me want to read a lot more of these ancient historians. And I read the first 12 pages of this, and I was really loving it. It reminded me a lot of the books of Kings and the books of Chronicles in the Bible, kind of combining broad historical events with very intimate personal anecdotes of different kings and people. So I think I'm going to really enjoy this. And then the next, another classic, The History of the Peloponnesian War by Thucydides. I was so enamored with Tacitus's descriptions of wars in his history book that I thought that, a book that is titled literally The History of So-and-so War would be very interesting. I read the first 12 pages, and again, I was already really enamored. I was already in love. So, yeah. So that's that. I have one more book that I just grabbed from home that I had previously read and wanted to reread, and it's The Human Use of Human Beings by Norbert Wiener. Norbert Wiener was a pretty famous mathematician and physicist who invented the field of cybernetics. So this book is just about the opportunities and the perils of technology and growing automation in society. And it was published back in the 1950s, and it's crazy how much of it reads like prophecy, even though it was published 60 years ago. So yeah, I wish I could go more in depth with this, because he covers a lot of ground, but yeah, it's a fascinating book. So yeah, and then we have one more. Oh wait, no. I have a book that just arrived in the mail yesterday. When I came home yesterday from New York to my apartment in Illinois, and came home to a really nice surprise, and it was this lovely copy of Homer's Iliad, the Robert Fitzgerald translation, which is the translation I have been wanting to read desperately for a while, and for some reason hadn't been able to find a copy of. So yeah, I finally got this. I ordered it off Amazon with a gift card, go figure. And yeah, I'm really excited to read this. I don't know if I will reread it this year. I have that possibility in the back of my mind. I'd certainly love to reread the Iliad. I mean, I want to keep rereading the Iliad my whole life, but sometime in the not too distant future, I would like to reread it. So yeah, I was really excited, and lovely cover, I think, too. Just a lovely book. So yeah. And then, lastly, I thought I would go through just very briefly, the unread books on my shelf that I've already talked about briefly, so, or I've already talked about on this channel. So I thought I would just go through them and talk about them very briefly, and so this video will encompass a sort of TBR, almost, TBR with quotes around it, because, it's not like I'm going to be reading all of this the next month. It's just that this is what I'm going to be reading in this year, because I mentioned that I want to read through all of the books that I own. So first off, I thought I would hold up an anthology of American literature, which I just grabbed from my parents' house. It was just in their house. But it has many different things that I'm interested in possibly reading. It has like a bunch of the essays of Ralph Waldo Emerson. It has Walden and Civil Disobedience by Thoreau. It has The Scarlet Letter by Hawthorne. It has a bunch of poetry, and a bunch of short stories by Melville. So this isn't formally, I'm not formally counting this as a part of my TBR. I mean, I'm not going to read this whole thing. It's gigantic. But I'm going to be kind of dipping in and out of it in various places. So yeah, there's that. And then, really quickly, I have Leaves of Grass by Walt Whitman, which I do kind of want to read the whole thing of, but with big books of poetry like this, it's hard for me to start at the beginning and go through to the end, just because, I don't know why collections of poetry don't work for me that way. I want to just skip around and read what poems strike me. But I'll definitely be rereading Song of Myself, which I tried to do a video series of readings of, and it kind of fell off the side of the world. But anyway, I'll hopefully be dipping in and out of this. I have the English poems of John Donne, which I'll be reading in the similar way. The Metaphysical Poets, I'll be reading again, same way. And then I have Paradise Lost and Selected Poetry and Prose by John Milton. I've already read Paradise Lost, but there's a bunch of sonnets and some of John Milton's shorter narrative poems in here, and his prose, obviously. So I think I'll be reading through all of that, or trying to at some point. So there's that. And these ones I mentioned, I'm not counting as a part. I mentioned how I'm going to be reading 5 books, and then allowing myself to buy 1 book as just a way of whittling down my TBR. These I am not counting in that, because like I said, I'm not, for a lot of these, may not end up actually reading the entire book. I may, because I'll be skipping around a lot. But still, I'm going to be reading them this year. And that is also true of Shakespeare After All by Marjorie Garber. I'm going to read this, probably will take me a very long time to get through it, because what I want to do is I want to read Marjorie Garber's chapter on each play, after I have either just watched a production or after I've just read it or reread it. So that will take a long time. So yeah, this again I'm not counting as part of my read 5 and buy 1 challenge, because it's going to be such a slow read. So yeah, there's that, and then the next several are all ones that I'm going to be reading. I have my lovely copy of the Canterbury Tales. I have the Confessions of San Agustin, which I started to read and got about halfway through, and that just kind of stopped for no particular reason. Aside from that, I was attracted to other books. But at this point, I think I'm going to... I'm not feeling that motivated to read it now, and I think a large part that's because I lost my momentum by not reading it for like 2 weeks. So I think I'm going to have to set this aside for a little while, for a month or two, and then start it over from the beginning, and just read it all the way through, because I was loving it when I was reading it, but I've just lost all my momentum with reading it. So yeah, there's that. A Johnson Reader, which I hauled a while back, a collection of different writings of the literary critic Samuel Johnson. Death in Venice and Seven Other Stories by Thomas Mann. I'm looking forward to reading more short stories this year, so this will be part of that. Middlemarch by George Eliot. Don Quixote. And we have, finally, Murphy by Samuel Beckett, which is the last book by Samuel Beckett that I own that I haven't read yet. Once I have read this, I believe I will have read 7 Samuel Beckett books by Samuel Beckett. So I think it will be safe to say that I am quite a Beckhead. So yeah, that is my haul/TBR. Anyway, that is all. So thanks for watching, everyone. Bye.